Nearly 1 year has passed since the beginning of the latest escalation of conflict in Gaza. Israeli forces launched airstrikes and ground operations after Hamas and other armed groups attacked southern Israel on October 7th of 2023, killing 1,200 people and taking over 200 hostages. Now the conflict seems likely to escalate into a wider regional war. New Time reporter Balzhan Samigulina talked to former Israeli negotiator to Palestinians Daniel Levy and human rights activist Ashish Prashar to make analysis on the escalation of conflict throughout the year. Details in the explainer section.
Previous Israeli campaigns in Gaza lasted a few weeks at most, but this one appears to be a war with no end game. According to the UN, more than 41,000 Palestinians have been killed as a result of Israel's ground and air operations. A further 95,000 people have been injured, and a quarter will require lifelong care following amputations and spinal injuries. All of Gaza's population of 2.1 million is now in need of humanitarian assistance, and more than 2 million of Palestinians, half of them children, are living without access to sufficient water, food, shelter and medical care. This has been compounded by the destruction of 60% of Kazakh structures due to fighting and bombardment, including civilian infrastructure such as schools, religion buildings and hospitals. Now let's stop at a timeline of key moments since the latest escalation in Gaza throughout the year. On October 7 last year, Hamas, which controlled the Gaza Strip since 2007, chose the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah to launch the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. Israeli officials said around 1,200 people were killed and more than 250 were kidnapped and taken into Gaza. The next day, Israel declared a war and announced a complete siege of Gaza, restricting all supplies, including electricity, food and fuel. By October 11, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, unpopular before October 7 and now accused of failing to protect the country, formed an emergency unity government with Benny guns and called up 3,000 and 60,000 reservists to direct the war.
66 בעד, 4 נגד. אני מוסיף גם את קולו של חבר הכנסת דרעי לפרוטוקול.
זוהי באמת מלחמה על הבית. והיא חייבת להסתיים בדבר אחד, בניצחון מוחלט. ובריסוק וחיסול החמאס, החמאס שהוא דאעש.
מתחייב כחבר הממשלה לשמור אמונים למדינת ישראל ולחוקיה.
The initial attacks lasted up to October 27, then Israel initiated a ground invasion of Gaza, despite US warnings about potential civilian casualties. Following this, on November 24, Israel and Hamas posed hostilities to facilitate a hostage for prisoners exchange, allowing for increased aid into Gaza. Eventually, the pause ended after 7 days. Each side said the other breached the deal. Daniel Levy, president of the US Middle East Project and the former Israeli negotiator Taba during Prime Minister Ehud Barak's leadership and Oslo B under Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, noted that a broader peace has not been on the agenda. While a ceasefire might have been considered, he emphasized that despite officials claiming parties were close to a deal, that simply wasn't the case, and as it wasn't a priority for the Israeli government.
Israel has achieved some military successes in Gaza, but it is not going to have what Netanyahu has talked about, which is a total victory, a total dismantling, destruction of Hamas. That doesn't happen. Hamas is a political movement, an armed resistance, and an idea. And it's an idea which is not unique to Palestinians or to this moment in history. Whenever a people lives under an occupation, a colonial oppression, doesn't have its rights, there's always going to be resistance, whether that is justifiable in some of its manifestations or not. So I think it's Netanyahu's insistence on trying to achieve a bar which cannot be reached.
For over 2 months, the situation kept dire, with over 20,000 deaths reported by Gaza's health ministry, including many women and children, amid continuous Israeli strikes and military operations. Humanitarian conditions have worsened, with hospitals overwhelmed and accusations of war crimes and human rights violations escalating. Then on January 11th, fears grew of a wider regional conflict transferring transferring into so-called Red Sea crisis. The Houthis attacked commercial ships in the Red Sea, warning it would escalate operations during Ramadan in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. The British and American militaries in response bombed multiple sites in Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen. British political strategist and human rights activist Ashish Prashar added that Yemen desperately needs international aid.
And what people could do to support them is to make sure that the people of Yemen have all the resources they need while they get bombarded by Western planes every now and then. The rest of the world should be making sure that Yemen has all the aid it needs, all the food, medical supplies to survive this Western onslaught.
The situation in Gaza remained critical, with escalating violence in Rafah in May leading to significant civilian casualties, over 30,000 reported. That means around 1 in 20 in Gaza are considered to be dead or wounded, according to Gaza's health ministry. In the middle of July, Israel attacked Al-Mawasi, a crowded tent camp designated as a humanitarian zone housing people displaced by the war in Gaza. The strikes resulted in at least 39 Palestinian deaths, raising the overall toll to over 41,000. The situation in Gaza was escalating, including political realm, with countries like Ireland and Spain moving closer to recognizing a Palestinian state amid ongoing conflict. In this context, the two-state solution would be almost impossible to achieve, said Daniel Levy.
I think we will see not only new legal vulnerabilities globally for Israel, new anger and boycotts, but also even new forms of resistance, all of which takes us to the question of two states. And I think the reality on the ground makes two states look very, very unlikely. If it's ever going to happen, Israel's cost-benefit calculation will have to look different, and Israel will have to offer something it has never offered, which is genuine ending of the occupation, genuine Palestinian sovereignty, and we're an awfully long way from that.
Nearly a year on, peace between the parties remain elusive, and the conflict continues to escalate, with Israeli ground operation against Hezbollah in Lebanon and ongoing exchanges of attacks, while Iran has launched over 150 ballistic missiles into Israel. Analysts warn that these developments have already triggered a wider regional conflict. The risk of renewed war and worsening regional conditions are real, leaving only hope for a return to stability in the Middle East. Baljan Samigulina, New Time.